there, this is the Sherlock Brew Podcast series brought to you by Sherlock Supercoach AI. On the show, you'll find actionable insights and bite-sized conversations with HR and business leaders on topics that provoke thoughts and new paradigms to better understand and develop Gen Z and young millennials on your team. We'll help you look at new possibilities and gain perspectives to level up young professionals and help them surge ahead on your team. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Sherlock Brew Podcast. I'm here with Steve Woolwine. Welcome, Steve. I'm so glad you can be here with us today.
I'm glad I'm here.
First, Steve, I would like to briefly introduce you, and then we're going to dive into today's questions.
Sure.
Steve Woolwine has 15 years of experience developing human capital strategies tied to pragmatic solutions and programs which drive measurable business outcomes. He leverages data and analytics to enable decision-making and utilizes a cross-functional knowledge and effectively partner with business leaders to influence and drive meaningful change. So with that said, Steve, I want to dive right into a question we've all been dying to ask you, which is, we're doing this open interview with something that you're so passionate about, which is how to help Gen Z battle disengagement. And let me just maybe provide some context first, which is their expectations of the workforce lead to a lot of stress and disengagement. There have been a ton of studies showing that they are by far the most disengaged group in the workforce. What have you noticed or recommend to help companies navigate this challenge?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is this is not a new problem. And when you think about any type of angle that you look at diversity and inclusion, it's just another one of those. And so you have a different, workforce entering that has different expectations, that has different backgrounds, values, and so forth. And it's really just more about how do you drive inclusion of that workforce. Now, I think specific to Generation Z, I think they're raising expectations across the board. And what I mean by that is, if you think about what that generation has been through to this point, the technology, the connectedness, there's a certain level of expectations that they have that other generations just don't. And so everything is meant to be just in time, right at your fingertips, answers right at your fingertips. And obviously in the professional environment, there's a lot more ambiguity. There's a lot more looseness. And I think that impacts someone in that generation navigating that. And I think at the end of the day, some of the things that organizations have to focus on are not really different than what we focused on prior. But I think it actually it's the gap between the expectations and what exists today is what has to be addressed. And honestly, I think every generation would be benefited to closing that gap, because I think some of the things that Gen Z values and cares about, it's not much different from other generations at the end of the day. And so I think that's really the biggest thing. And when you think about this generation, like if you really boil it down to they're starting to enter the workforce in the next 5 years, they're going to represent 30% of the workforce. I believe they're already a larger part of the workforce than the baby boomer generation. And that means we're going to have to put a lot of focus. And even something as simple as acknowledging what they've been through in the last couple of years. So I think with COVID and pandemic, a lot of this generation, their junior, senior years of college or their master's studies, whatever it is, was basically fully remote for some people. And so when you think about onboarding into a new organization, and kind of the stress that brings, think about doing that on the back of having to onboard most times in a virtual way. A lot of your manager, your team, your colleagues, stakeholders could be fully remote. And while you can create those relationships, there's nothing like that can substitute by creating that organic relationship that you would get in an office and so forth. So they have a lot more challenges than what some other generations have. I don't think that when you think about kind of some of the normal HR process and so forth that have not really been fully accounted for yet.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of empathy and understanding, and that is super helpful. So I want to talk about the idea of enabling Gen Z success by creating a true apprentice program. Could you elaborate on that? I know there's something that you're really passionate about.
Yeah, so it relates to some of the onboarding concepts that we've kind of mentioned. And I think the first thing is when you think about apprentice program, it has a very, very clear goal. It has a very clear understanding of what is required in that job. And I think those things are so incredibly important, especially for Gen Z, where they are trying to navigate a corporate environment. They're used to having all this information at their fingertips. So having clear goals and expectations of what they have to do is very, very, very important. I think also an apprentice program, I think by default, that means that you have advocates and you have an owner of that program. And so when you think about career development or career path, whatever it is, yeah, there's a co-ownership by the employee, but there's also the co-ownership by the manager of the organization. And so when you think about an apprentice program, like that is an investment the manager is making in a very structured way. That also means that apprentice program is a very defined program. And so it goes back to the expectations. So like whether it's a 12-month, 18-month, 24-month program, it is very clear what those milestones are for the employee to hit and how you measure those. And at what point, what happens at the end of the apprentice program, which is probably the most important thing. The end of the apprentice program leads to some sort of tradesmanship if you're thinking about it in more of a vocational standpoint. What does that mean for organizations? So you have a lot of these organizations have these leadership programs that focuses on top campuses, for example. And then you graduate that, then it's like the employee's looking around, okay, what's next? And so that apprentice program actually will define that in a way that helps people understand what is next and how does this actually help you start a career with your organization. And so I think when it comes down to it, it's just structure, it's just being defined. I think having the skin in the game from the organization, very specific individuals who are really honed in on the success of the participants. I think all of that is very key. I think the other piece is in an organization, there's a very particular way to do things. Sometimes every organization is different. That's very difficult to learn, especially when you're in a remote situation. So I think an apprentice program also focuses on kind of how to navigate the organization, what really is the culture, not just what's on the careers website, but like what are those values and ways of operating that matter in terms of achieving outcomes, creating relationships, surfacing problems and so forth like that. That all helps like create the how side of the equation of like, hey, this is your job, but this is how we expect you to do it. And this is what leads to success.
This is so eye-opening for me because as you're talking about this, it really reminds me of someone in my generation. There were barely any really vocational skills that we actually learned in school. And not many schools actually offer that. And even was in many ways kind of looked down upon. Like you want to be as academic as you could be, especially for the Asian population, master, PhD, postdoc. And I realized now looking at I live in a very comfortable neighborhood. Our neighbors' sons and daughters go to vocational schools. At 16, they have certain, like you said, trademanship. But I feel like so many people really don't. And now, as you're speaking about this subject, I realize that now the companies have to inevitably take on so much more. When you're 22, out of college studying English, Latin and math, you're really not ready to do anything actually at work. And I know young people are really struggling with that.
Yeah. And it's going to be more and more important as our jobs get more intertwined with technology and AI and so forth, because it's going to look different. Like doing something in school is going to look different than what you actually do in the organization. And oftentimes those SOPs and stuff don't really exist in the organization either. So like, that makes it even more difficult for someone entering the workforce to be able to navigate that. And so when you think about what are the different tools and technologies the workforce uses, how do you actually leverage them across the end-to-end product or end-to-end process that you're assigned to? All of that stuff is going to matter. It's just going to be even more complex. Like you think about what the next generation is going to look like with generative AI and all the other technology that's going to be in place. Like it's not just about putting someone in a seat or a virtual seat. It's about how do you leverage all those tools? No different than a plumber or like a carpenter, they have different tools. And so that's going to be the way that we're going to have to think about onboarding people in the future.
Thanks so much for watching. I hope you find it helpful. We'll soon be back with our next podcast. In the meantime, please share this episode with your friends and colleagues.